It is now my honor to welcome our fearless leader, Sister Donna, to the podium. Sister Donna continues to lead us in the implementation of our strategic initiatives. Recently, she was recognized by the nonprofit Times as one of the 50 top power and influence leaders of 2018. Congratulations, Sister Donna. And wait, there's more. She has also been named as the 2019 Honorary President of the Canadian Psychological Association. Please join me in welcoming our Catholic Charities USA President, Sister Donna Markham.
Well, it's wonderful to be with you, everybody. I am just delighted that most of us were able to get here with the weather challenges and all the other challenges we're facing. And before I do anything else, I want to acknowledge the presence of a very special guest who's with us, and that is Archbishop Christophe Pierre, who is the nuncio to the United States from the Vatican. And he's going to be speaking later, so we're just so happy to have you with us, Archbishop. So if you get a chance to say hello to him, please do so. He's a great friend of Catholic Charities. And then I also would like just to acknowledge and to ask everybody here who in any way, shape, or form has shared the journey with a refugee or asylee, a migrant, a DACA kid, and all the people that we serve. So would all of you who do that work stand, please, so we can acknowledge you? You are certainly a treasure to us all, and thank you for all that you're doing, and thank you for inviting some of us to join you in the midst of some of these crisis times. One thing I would just share with you is that I plan to take a day off to write this presentation. So I was sitting in my house on an August morning, and I found myself completely frozen. My brain was not working. I could not get myself to focus on what I wanted to say. I think that the news of the stomach-churning grand jury report on the sexual abuse perpetrated by or covered up by clergy made it impossible for me that day to collect my thoughts. I found myself vacillating between anger, disgust, and profound sadness. Most of all, I was consumed with the magnitude of the harm done to so many vulnerable children and adolescents. Over a year ago, I knew that I wanted to reflect with you on the Emmaus story as a way of talking about sharing the journey. And getting nowhere with my writing, I decided it was time for me to go and spend some time in some serious prayer with that scripture passage. And I couldn't write that day. I had to wait. I needed time to pray. I needed time to be present to the scriptures. And I needed to let the Spirit guide me in what needed to be said as we reflect on sharing a journey and many, many different levels of what that means today. So, just a few thoughts from pondering that scripture. So there are these two disciples. One of them has a name, Cleopas. The other one does not have a name. Maybe this was his wife. We don't know. Walking together from Jerusalem to Emmaus. And as you heard in the prayer, it's about a 7-mile walk to get from that place where those two disciples experienced having their belief shattered and their hopes dashed. They were in the process of abandoning the Christian journey because Jesus had not met their expectations of what a Redeemer was supposed to be. The complete scandal of the crucifixion had overshadowed any belief they had in the message of the resurrection. They were grieving, they were despondent, and they were in a lot of pain. So to put it succinctly, they were in pretty horrible shape. Different, certainly, but in many ways similar to the feelings of grief, loss, and disillusionment that many of us may have had over the course of these past several weeks. Sometimes journeys are horrifically painful, whether they be along a road or a pathway, whether they be from one border to another border, or whether they be the journey of a soul in search of a God who had become seemingly silent. So back to the scriptures. Apparently, out of nowhere, a stranger crosses their path and strikes up a conversation with these two dejected characters. The ostensible chance encounter with this stranger pushes the disciples to begin to recount the events of the past days. They have to recount the days, the events that led them to question their very faith. They had to tell the story. The recounting of the tragic events to this stranger evidently engages them sufficiently that they insist that this stranger stay with them for a meal and share supper with them. So this is important, a journey, an encounter, and an act of hospitality, and then a big revelation. That's the movement in the Emmaus story, and I believe it's the movement in our own lives right now. In the breaking of the bread, that great symbol of Middle Eastern hospitality, the two disciples recognized the stranger in the midst as Jesus himself. Their eyes had been opened, and immediately as that happened, Jesus disappeared again. Interestingly, the disciples immediately turn around and they make tracks back to Jerusalem, back to the very place that was the scene of the horrific event. They had to go back to tell others what happened. Their eyes beheld the risen Jesus and their hearts were on fire. So 4 important things happened. It just happened. First of all, the demands that God measures up to the disciples' expectations of how God should be God give way to the demands of extending hospitality to a stranger. Second, the bereavement over the loss of Jesus disappears in the face of encountering and welcoming the stranger. And third, hospitality replaces morose self-focus and self-concern. And fourth, recognition of Jesus sets their hearts on fire and restores hope, and they return to Jerusalem to be consoled and confirmed by the community of believers. It is true, Jesus is risen. Hope is restored and spirits lifted in the accompaniment and welcoming of the stranger. I believe very deeply that whatever brokenness we may be carrying in our own hearts is healed as we open ourselves to human encounter. That goes for what's happened in the church today, as well as whatever private pain we may hold within ourselves. You and I are transformed in the act of encounter, sometimes in the encounter with a stranger. And I'd like to share with you a brief video of an encounter that Catholic Charities in Baltimore had with a stranger. His name is Jose, and he has been working with Catholic Charities in having made the journey here, and I'd like you to hear his story.
Yeah, my name is Jose Carrillo from El Salvador. I've been in the United States for 4 years already. I grew up with my grandparents because my mom left me when I was 2 years old. We was really poor over there. You can have a job, but you cannot work because you gotta pay everything to the gangster people. Either way, if you work hard, you're not getting money. I was a normal person. I went to school. Then I went to the Air Force because my mom wanted that for me when I turned 16 or 15, something like that. My mom told me if I want to come over here because the violence over my country was really bad. So she decided to, bring me over here. So I crossed Guatemala. The really hard part was crossing Mexico. Mexico has a lot of drug dealers that you have to pay for everything. We paid like $2,000, something like that. I remember my mom paid another $3,000, and the cartel take me over here to the United States. And then I was walking when the border patrol see me, and they just stopped me, and then they put me like in the back to the truck. But they was really nice person. I come to Maryland and I see my mom. I haven't seen her for, I don't know, more than 12 years. So I see my mom for the first time. We're here, it's not because we're against her. We're here because we need a better opportunity to grow up in the life. When you come to the United States, you feel scared about everybody can hurt you. And that is not true. Some people really want to help you, like Catholic charities. They want to help people, but most people don't believe that. So I really want to invite people to come to Catholic charities and ask for help, because more people don't do it because they think they're going to get deportation or something like that. Now my family is together. I feel happy because I feel safe and I feel finally legal, and I'm so happy and grateful too.
So how many stories like that have we heard? Far too many. And I think it's really important for us to hear firsthand from people like Jose. And I want to tell you about another story that is an Emmaus story that happened recently, and one that for me holds many levels of meaning. It's a Catholic Charities story. Last month, I deployed 5 staff from the national office to go to assist Catholic Community Services of Tucson with the migrant crisis at the border. And in the course of the staff's time there, they met 2 brothers, Edwin and Carlos, who had made the long journey from Honduras to the US border, eventually landing at Casa Alitas. The 2 brothers had been caught in crossfire of a gang fight, and Carlos had been shot with a stray bullet. As a result, he was paralyzed from the waist down. He and Edwin made the decision to make the dangerous journey to the US in a desperate attempt to find safety. To do that, Edwin pushed his brother Carlos in his wheelchair 2,000 miles from Honduras to Nogales. We can only surmise their emotions as they made that terrible journey. What did they feel? What were they talking about over the course of those 2,000 miles? Whom did they meet along the way? We'll likely never know. What we do know, though, is what happened when they reached our agency in Arizona. They were met with kindness, with help, with respect by Teresa Cavendish and Kat Smith and Peg Harmon and volunteers. Hopefully, they caught a glimpse of the Christ in the persons of those ministers of charity. When our CCUSA team arrived at Casa Alitas, they had the privilege of meeting the brothers, hearing their stories, and sharing table with them. The CCUSA team came back to Alexandria deeply affected by that encounter and by other encounters they had. Upon returning, they reflected on their journey. This was an extremely powerful experience that changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. Another said, "A little girl wants to share a sticker with me. I smile and choose an adorable cupcake sticker. When she applies the sticker to my shirt, I begin to hold back tears as I realize this little girl's whole world consists of what she had in her little bag." And another staff person, "The journey was well worth it. Seeing and contributing will continue to fill my spiritual cup." And another, "I hoped to carry some of the burdens of others while I was there, but I realized they also carried me." So here's the question. Who has met the Christ? The exhausted migrant that lands at our door? The caseworker who listens to the story of their journey? The volunteer who treats the immigrant child as a human being and plays with her and gives her a hug or a toy? I believe God is present in every single one of these encounters. You bear the Christ, and you encounter the Christ. You are irrevocably changed. We are irrevocably changed by the encounters that we have with suffering. That change, I think, has affected all of us sitting in this room in one way or another. The encounter with those who are poor and vulnerable, migrants, refugees, asylees, change us. As the kids say, we all got woke. So let's imagine the Emmaus story a little bit differently. Two migrants are on a terrifying journey. They were filled to the brim with fear and loss and despair. Loss of their home, loss of their families, loss of their way of life. They had no clue what was going to happen to them now. They felt alone, and they were very afraid. Along the way, they encountered some Catholic Charities workers who invited them in and gave them some clean clothes, some food, and promised to accompany them to make sure that they would be safe. But most of all, these workers gave them respect and extended human compassion as they listened to the events of their journeys. Slowly, their fear begins to be replaced with some glimmer of hope. At the same time, unbeknownst to the migrants, some of the Catholic Charities workers were themselves carrying deep sorrows and burdens. Some were dealing privately with questions of meaning and belief. These have been tough days, tougher than most. There is suffering and scandal. There is loss and anger. What on earth is God trying to do? Is God even here? And then, by chance, these Catholic Charities workers encounter someone very different, someone who doesn't speak English, someone who has nothing but the clothes on his back, someone who breaks through all the pressing concerns and gut-wrenching emotion that's in the heart of the Catholic Charities worker. Without realizing it themselves, the migrants begin to call forth something very deep within the Catholic Charities workers, something that is nothing short of a tap into the sacred. And the Catholic Charities workers are, in somewhat mysterious ways, consoled. In the act of providing hospitality to the stranger, they recognize the person of Jesus in a new way. So a journey, an encounter, some hospitality, and beginning to see with new eyes. God is really in this time, no matter how difficult it is. God is in you and in me, and in the refugee, and in the migrant, and the stranger, and the Emmaus journeyers. God ministers to us in our shared brokenness. Let's take a minute to absorb this. Our Catholic Charities family has accompanied so many people on their journeys. You've walked with 400,000 immigrants and refugees this year alone, and given them hospitality, provided them with comfort. You've helped at least, latest number, 724 children separated at the border be reunited with their families. And I would imagine you've been affected by the encounters that you've had, not only with the migrants and refugees, but also with all the frightened and vulnerable people you've cared for this past year and beyond. Sadly, you know that we have had to deal with the loss of a number of our programs that assist refugees and asylees. The radical decrease in the numbers of persons being admitted to our country, down from a projected 120,000 2 years ago to 60,000, and now projected to be 20,000, has meant that we're no longer able to accompany some of the most terribly abandoned and frightened human beings on the planet. There is a lingering source of pain in this for each one of us, because we're no stranger to the enormity of the needs they have and the pain they experience. Nevertheless, we continue our advocacy efforts on the Hill and with the administration, and on behalf of refugees, asylees, DACA kids, and others. That work has become intensified enormously over the course of this past year. So, how have you and I been changed through the encounters we have with these suffering souls, these strangers, all kinds of people who come to us for help? Are you and I able to let go of our own private desires that God measures up to our expectations and how God is supposed to be God right now, and instead open ourselves rather to welcome God into our broken hearts in these painful times? Can our profound grief over the loss of our unjaded memories of our faith and our church be assuaged by looking into the eyes of a stranger and providing her with hospitality and welcome? And might our extension of hospitality to the Jose's and the Edwins and the Carloses of our world somehow begin to mitigate our anger, our deep concerns, and our collective sadness during these very confusing times? Can we allow the anguish of the stranger to be the expression of the suffering Christ in our midst, and be open to healing, to the healing that kind of recognition brings to us? These are questions that I invite you to ponder with me. And I'm going to ask you just to take a couple minutes we're going to just be quiet for a couple of minutes, and to think about those questions. And then we'll have about just a short time to share a reflection or two with the people that we're seated with at our table. So first, just a couple minutes of silence. And now I would like to invite you just to share a couple of thoughts with the folks that you're seated with at your table. And if you're by yourself, God forbid, move over. Okay, talk to somebody, because it's really important that we can speak from our own experience and our own experience right now in these times. So if I might interrupt you, hopefully during the course of these days, you'll have a chance to continue to share some of the Emmaus stories from your own life. These are not easy questions. These are not easy questions. But I think it's so very important for us to be able to come together as a community of charity and reflect together in some substantive faith sharing and prayer. So just for a few minutes, we've been sharing with one another and listening to each other's experience of the emotional impact of these past months. Let's listen again to the last part of this Emmaus story. The disciples said to one another, "Did not our hearts burn within us as he talked to us on the road and explained the scriptures to us?" They set out that instant and returned to Jerusalem. They assembled together with their companions and said, "Yes, it is true. The Lord has risen." It wasn't a fake story. It wasn't fake news. It's a true story. As Catholic Charities, we, like the disciples, find comfort and confirmation when we come back to our companions each year. Our annual gathering, along with all the other encounters we have with Catholic Charities, affords us with a sacred place, a faith community, where our journeys find companions, our hospitality is shared as we tell our stories to one another, and our hope is renewed. This is the treasured gift we have in this community of faith and mercy. It is really in this kind of shared, grounded communion that you and I can be healed and have our hearts once again set on fire and our aspirations restored as we deeply embrace the good news that it is true. He is risen. Thank you very much.